Ghost Story Horror Vampire Visit. After finishing work at the office, Thanh quickly stopped by the district market to buy a few things to prepare for the family's dinner. When Thanh got home, he had to busy cleaning and taking care of his youngest child. Only then can she go take a shower. Her life continues day after day like that, although not rich, but very full for a happy life for her and her husband. Thanh's husband, Luong, is a corrugated iron worker, so his work is quite busy. Because he works on irregular hours, the time he returns home is difficult to predict. Thanh finished everything, then ate and prepared to go to bed. She was about to turn off the light switch on the wooden pillar when she heard a loud knock on the door from outside. Thanh retracted her hand, her eyes looked curiously towards the door, then asked in a questioning voice, "Who is it?" But there was no answer, and the sound of tapping on the wooden door's planks continued to echo. Thanh was a little scared, because she was the only one at home at this hour, and her husband hadn't come home yet. Nowadays, there are many daring incidents in the newspaper, such as it is not uncommon for someone to take advantage of an empty house to break in to rob and kill someone. Thinking about these things makes Thanh even more determined that before opening the door, he must clearly determine who is outside before proceeding. She then looked through the crack in the wooden door, looking outside to see who was knocking on the door. Inside the house the lights were bright, but outside the house it was dark, making it difficult for her to see clearly. She had to squint continuously for her eyes to adjust naturally before she could see the scene outside. There was no one outside. The bush across the street kept swaying with each wind, causing Thanh to hold his breath to pay careful attention. Thanh patiently looked for a while longer, scanning every corner of the front of the house with every glance, but saw no one. She continued to ask questions. "Who is that?" No one answered. Thanh breathed a sigh of relief and was about to turn her head to go back to bed, when suddenly a pair of dull eyes and the blank face of a woman with a wrinkled old face caught her eye. Thanh was so scared that she jumped and fell to the ground. She stumbled and tried to scream, but a sound came from outside. "Miss, can you help us? Let us sleep over tonight." That voice came from the woman standing outside the door. Thanh was still shaking, but now realized that it was a person, not a ghost. Moreover, he is an old man, not a robber at all. Yet she keeps lurking like a ghost. How can people not be scared? Thanh stood up, adjusted the messy clothes on his body, then slowly raised his hand to open the wooden door latch, then opened the door to reveal it. She slowly looked outside and now saw a black tie woman, dressed in traditional brocade clothes with bangs of hair standing looking up at her. Behind her was a girl, about 17 or 18, dressed very sloppily and seemed very tired. When the woman saw that Thanh had opened the door, she immediately smiled stiffly and said in a pleading voice, "Miss, today we went to town to do business, but couldn't sell anything. It's already late. We didn't have a place to rest. My baby was so sick, so I took the risk and asked to stay at her house for the night." Thanh rolled his eyes and looked all over the mother and daughter before thinking about the calculation. These two people are so late at night, and they are strangers who want to ask for a place to sleep, so I have to be very careful. Thinking to herself, Thanh tried to shake her head, but then the cold wind blew in from outside, making her feel a little uneasy. Then looking at her poor daughter, Thanh gritted his teeth and said to himself, "That's it. People are also very poor. It's just a one-night stay." She decided to let these two people stay in the house to sleep tonight. She said, "Okay, you two just come in here." Thanh opened the door wide to welcome them into the house, but just sighed and shook his head. After the two of them entered the house, Thanh still looked up, hoping that her husband would soon appear and return home early so that she could feel secure and no longer worry because she was only with two strangers. Again. Thanh pulled the wooden door closed, then quickly installed the latch firmly and carefully. Then she turned back into the house and walked closer to where the black tie woman and her child were standing. She looked at her mother and said, "Wait here, I'll go clean the bed near the kitchen, then tonight you and I will sleep there temporarily." The mother and daughter nodded without saying anything. Waiting for Thanh to leave, the mother and daughter suddenly looked at each other with a very strange look. Thanh retreated to clean up the pile of blankets and mattresses, not paying attention to the mother and daughter of the other family looking at her in a very calculating way. After removing the blankets and mattresses on the bed, she motioned for mother and child to sit down before asking, "What are the names of you and your mother? What kind of business do you do that makes you come home so late?" The two people sat down on the cushion, slowly took off the bags on their backs, placed them on the ground, and answered honestly. "My name is Quang Thi Na, and my daughter's name is Luong Thi Nay. We live in Hen village, about 20 kilometers away in the mountains." "What do you and your mother trade?" Thanh continued to ask. The mother and daughter still looked very honest and answered, "My mother and I sell fabric, handmade brocade goods. The day before yesterday it was so rainy and cold, and the house was out of rice, so we still had to try going to the district town to bring goods to sell. But today it's so cold, and it's raining heavily, so no one goes out. It was already dark and there wasn't any sale, so my mother and I still had to try to stay put. But the night got colder and the little girl got sick." Speaking of this, the woman named Na had tears in her eyes. Her child, Nenh, had purple lips from the cold and was also shivering and coughing. Thanh felt sorry for him, quickly covered Na with a blanket and continued, "So have you and your family eaten anything yet?" Mrs. Na shook her head. Thanh immediately sighed and brought a portion of rice from the kitchen for the mother and child to eat. After the mother and child finished eating, they went to bed. At this time, a voice called from outside the house. "Thanh, open the door for me." It is the voice of Luong, Thanh's husband. Today the work finished late, so Luong could not go home until now. Hearing her husband's voice, Thanh was very happy and immediately ran to open the door to welcome her husband into the house. Luong went inside the house, took off his sweaty shirt. Even though it was a very cold winter, he was still drenched in sweat, proving how hard his work was. Luong went into the kitchen, quickly ate the meal, then suddenly saw the mother and child and asked, "Who is that?" Thanh was rocking his baby to sleep when he turned around and replied, "They are two businessmen, please sleep over." Seeing how miserable they are because of the cold, I feel sorry for them. Luong briefly used his eyes to look at the mother and daughter, but did not say anything. Just continue eating. The other mother and child did not know whether they were asleep or not, but their bodies were as stiff as logs and their eyes were closed. After Luong finished eating, he went to the bathroom and poured a few buckets of water to clean himself, then crawled into bed. When Thanh saw that her husband had finished eating, she turned around to clean the dishes and chopsticks. Then she looked over at her sleeping child and saw that he was sleeping peacefully. She reached out and turned off the light switch near the wooden pole. As soon as the electricity went out, I heard Luong's snoring sound. Thanh crawled into the mattress, hugged Luong's body, and hugged her husband to sleep. Thanh's eyes were half-lidded, she breathed freely because she finally had a comfortable moment with her husband after a busy day. The night gradually descended, and Luong's snores gradually faded from Thanh ears. Instead, there are the quiet sounds of the night, the buzzing of insects, and the croaking of creatures such as frogs outside, making people feel a very relaxed feeling. Thanh was also dozing off. She leaned even closer to her husband's body because she felt like the night air was getting colder. The wind whistled through the wooden door and flowed into the house, causing the temperature in the house to drop even lower. Even though Thanh was under a warm blanket, she still felt like she couldn't stop the cold. Then she gently shook Luong's body, wanting to wake him up so he could go and close the gap in the door where the cold wind was blowing so he could sleep easier. But she kept shaking, but Luong didn't wake up. She had to get up, put on her coat, go to the crack in the door where the wind was blowing in, and find an old, discarded shirt to stuff into the gap. She was groping in the dark, according to her memory, and did not turn on the light because she did not want her husband to wake up and be blinded. Suddenly, she felt like someone was staring behind her. I feel like I'm being watched by someone I don't know, so it's very uncomfortable. She immediately turned her head as a natural reflex, then was startled and gasped without saying a word. Behind her, there was a black figure standing backward in the night. That figure Thanh could only see dimly in the faint light emitted from the LED light on the electrical switch panel. Thanh was trembling, but when he looked closely, he immediately discovered that the shadow of a person standing there was a woman named Nenh. She walked around unsteadily and kept muttering in the Thai ethnic language. Thanh then asked, "Haven't you gone to bed yet?" The woman named Nenh suddenly turned her head to look at her. She suddenly fell silent without saying a word, causing Than's heart to stop. After a while, she spoke. "I had a hard time sleeping, so I walked around for a while." Thanh breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Oh my God, you made my heart skip a beat because I thought it was someone. Well, go to bed and go to sleep." Thanh finished speaking, then turned around and stuffed a piece of cloth from an old shirt into the crack of the door, so that the gap was firmly sealed. Then he continued to crawl into bed and nestled close to Luong's body to continue sleeping. The woman named Nenh also listened to her and returned to the bed, but only sat on the bed, not lying down, and she was thinking about something while muttering continuously. Thanh was so tired, he fell asleep and let her do whatever she wanted. After a while, suddenly at midnight, there was the sound of a baby crying, causing Thanh to wake up in shock. Thanh was startled, pushed aside the blanket covering his body, jumped up and looked towards the direction where the crying was coming from. Then a horrifying scene met her eyes. The woman named Nenh had now transformed into a terrible figure. Her big nose was as red as blood, her bright red eyes were holding her son's neck and lifting her up high, her mouth continuously mumbling sentences in the Thai ethnic language. She spoke with a bloodthirsty voice, and her child was also standing next to her, staring at her son as if preparing to do something extremely evil. Those two people still did not know that Thanh had woken up, but continued their actions. Thanh wanted to rush out and grab the child, but for some reason her whole body was stuck in one place without being able to move, as if there was some invisible force holding her down, making her unable to move. Can move. She also felt like this body was not hers anymore. It wasn't until a while later that Thanh was able to wiggle his arms, and then his whole body became flexible again. She cried out and rushed to grab the baby from the other two's hands. At this time, the light bulb was turned on, and her husband, Luong, also woke up from her screams. Thanh pointed to the other two people, then turned to face Luong and explained. She's a ghost." Luong rubbed his eyes and looked at the black tie mother and child and saw that they were still normal. As for Thanh, after pointing his finger, he turned back to look at them and saw that the appearance they had appeared before was no longer there. They were just an ethnic mother and child suffering from the cold. Thanh explained clearly to Luong. "Just now I saw my child crying so loudly. I woke up and saw her. She was a vampire." Thanh cried and explained that she had seen with her own eyes the woman's big red nose, pale skin, and undulating teeth that were about to sink into the baby's neck. Luong had always trusted his wife very much, so he immediately agreed with her. He ran to the corner of the house, grabbed the stick, forced the other two back into the corner, and shouted, "Get back inside, otherwise don't blame me. I'll hit you and you'll die, you devils." The mother and daughter were trembling and knelt down to beg, then were pushed into the corner of the wall, extremely scared. At this time, they were still like normal people and not at all like vampires, as Thanh said. Luong pushed the two people back to the corner of the wall, then urged Thanh to report to the commune police. Thanh quickly ran to the commune police headquarters to report the news. Just a moment later, several people on duty ran to his house. Leading the way was a commune police officer in his 40s. He looked around at the scene in the house and said, "What's going on?" Luong pointed at the other two people and said, "My husband and I discovered that these two people were ghosts. They intended to kill our child while we were sleeping." The commune police officer smiled and said, "Nonsense, what the devil? What do you two mean to accuse them of wanting to kill your child? Okay, everyone follow me to the headquarters to write a report to take statements." After that, the mother and child were taken to the commune police headquarters, where they were searched, and they also stole a few things from the house, including all the gold and silver. They were convicted of theft and then left there. Thanh repeatedly argued that she had seen with her own eyes that she was a vampire as rumored, but no one believed. After a while, the matter ended, and the mother and daughter were only charged with petty theft, and thought that what Thanh saw was just her imagination. From then on, she saw her son acting very strangely. During the days when she was away from home, she saw him chatting with someone, but it was as if it was nothing. Because she looked around and saw no one, and her child was still just talking to herself, she tried to ask, "Who are you talking to?" Her son immediately replied, "Yes, I talked to him." Her son pointed to one direction, where the outside of the house was hidden deep behind bushes. Thanh glanced over, but didn't see anyone. The bush was still as quiet as ever. She thought that the boy must have been frightened after the ghost mother and child came to haunt him, so he was born mentally unstable. Then I didn't pay attention to it anymore. But later, thrilling things began to happen to her family. At night, when Thanh was sleeping, there were often clanking noises, the sound of bowls and chopsticks colliding, and the sound of the fence as if someone was tearing it apart outside. When Thanh regained consciousness and stood up to investigate, those noises also became silent. And then, she saw how often her son talked to himself, more and more every day. And its unintentional statements gradually deepened into a problem. That every night, there was often someone talking to him. Then when Thanh woke up, that person turned into a white dog and disappeared. Things like this kept happening to the point where Thanh and Luong could no longer stay in their house because they were so scared. Thanh started looking for skilled witch doctors of the ethnic people to ask for answers about this problem. Then a witch doctor explained, "You're in trouble, my son. The vampire came to your house like that, so there's no way he would let your family go. I'm sure those 2 vampires are still lurking somewhere. If you want to deal with them, you can only catch them in person and burn them, then maybe they'll be released. But now the government does not allow it to be done, so we will have to think differently. Thanh immediately asked, "So what should we do, teacher?" The witch doctor said, "The only way is to leave that house, then the vampires won't be able to find it. If they still find you, then you have to slaughter the buffalo so I can worship the ghosts, then ask the forest ghosts to chase them away." Thanh quickly followed suit, and from then on, she and her husband decided to move house. I asked someone else to take care of the old house. Later, the housekeeper there also said that he was at that house at night. Occasionally, I still hear the rustling noise of someone speaking a mumbled Thai language. And in the morning, the fence was still torn. Even though I had patched it up many times, it was still the same every night. People also occasionally see a white dog looming. It still lingers in this house as if waiting for something from the baby who was still here before. And finally, there were the terrifying howls of dogs at night, eventually scaring the caretakers who did not dare to stay and had to leave. Run out of.